Billions of people just living out their lives, oblivious.
Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself.
There's something wrong. There's something wrong. You don't know what it is. You don't know what it's there. Like a splinter, driving you mad.
Bring the ship up to broadcast depth. We're going in. Taking Neo to see her.
See who? The Oracle.
Buckle your seatbelts and place your tray tables in their upright positions. We're going in to explore some more interesting topics in this episode. Welcome aboard, everybody. We're happy you could join us. Let me introduce everyone participating in this episode. I'm James Sangster, founder and director of Houston Ghost Research. Our website is houstonghost.com. HGR is a spiritual crisis intervention and paranormal investigation group in the Houston area. I'm also the author of Help, I'm Haunted, Dealing with Ghosts, which is available on Amazon Kindle. Keith Davis is our co-host and fellow intellectual and seeker of truth. He's going to be joining us for this episode as well. Our central guest for this episode is Laurie Notch. She's been a co-host on previous episodes to offer her insight and input, but we decided to focus this particular discussion simply on her work and what she's doing. Laurie is an anthropologist and publisher of IdeaGems Magazine at IdeaGems.com. She is also a media producer and specializing in documentary films, and writes and produces for Zogby, Zogby Entertainment. Laurie has an upcoming project focusing on the paranormal movement sweeping the nation, which we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. Laurie, can you give us an idea of, I know we've talked about this in previous episodes, but an idea of your background and cultural significance, can you give us an idea of your academic background and where you've studied and who you've studied with and the different cultures you've observed?
All right. So you have to understand that I spent my whole life, because my dad was a pilot, so we lived many, many places, mostly Europe and the United States, and we traveled quite a bit. So as a child, I was exposed to maybe more mainstream Western cultures, but and I guess it gave me a taste for wanting to travel further as an adult and get into fields of study that would allow me to travel. So I did my undergraduate work at St. Cloud State University in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And I was focusing on English language and literature and, of course, French language and literature. But on the side, I was taking a lot of courses in physics, linguistics, early computer science. If you want to say early, it was back in the 70s. And I was taking, examining the process of how people learn and acquire and learn languages. And I was designing computer software for that for a while. And then I had an opportunity. When I graduated, I became an adjunct professor at a very young age. And I had an opportunity to go to Africa, which I did. So I left for Cameroon, West Africa in 1982. And you see, you have to understand, by that time, even during my undergraduate studies, I had lived in Denmark and France and the Soviet Union when it was the Soviet Union. I'd primarily been traveling and touring around, living and studying in Europe quite a bit. So
what part of West Africa were you in?
I was in Cameroon. So this was my first chance to go to, I guess, a kind of a non-Western country.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So I wound up going there, and primarily I was working at a college in the jungle of equatorial Africa, and I primarily focused on education and development. So yes, I was teaching a regular curriculum at this college, but also I was involved with local activities and agriculture, and you're talking people who still practiced horticulture. You didn't have farming on a large scale, but you did in some of the corporate farms and agricultural projects. But they'd have their little plots of land, and they were not saying totally subsistence in living, but it was pretty much a subsistence type of existence where, they produced enough food to take care of their needs. They would bring some of that food to the marketplace. So we're looking at horticultural villages that had different uh, definitions of community and society, and there was no technology to speak of except at that time transistor radios and a few cars and a lot of motorcycles because that's how you got around. Um, and it was pretty rough living. We didn't even have running water all the time. Sometimes you'd have to walk and go carry your own water and things like that. So
Well,
I was there.
from what I understand, it's still that way there.
Some places, I don't know. I know that from what I've heard, and remember, this is in the 80s. West Africa primarily has been developing rapidly, and I guess now they have television, electricity, and everything that wasn't there when I was there.
Oh,
But
I see.
I worked in either equatorial jungle area or for part of the year, and then I'd go way up into the southern Sahara Desert for another part of the year. And that was even more rustic, if you want to say, up in the desert area. We were pretty far from anything, and again, you'd have to walk a couple of miles to get your drinking water. I lived in what they called bukaroos, and they were earthen, what we call thatch and wattle housing. So they were made out of mud and a little cement and woven thatch roofs, and was again their primary source of or I guess way of making a living was agricultural or horticultural in nature. They grew sorghum and some monocrops like cotton. It's what helped. They got government subsidies if they grew so much cotton. And I was out working in the fields with everybody else. We also were dealing with a lot of refugees coming from the Civil War in the neighboring country of Chad. So I did a variety of things. But then during the 4 years that I was over there, I would encounter belief systems, of course, and of course, the shamans, the local shamans and healers, and there were a variety of ethnobotanicals, meaning plants from the areas. Different areas in Cameroon had different kinds of plants. And I saw the most amazing applications for the healing arts. I met a guy in North Cameroon, a friend of mine from the village had a motorcycle accident, broke his wrist. And yes, he went to the hospital, got x-rays, but there was a local healer who didn't even need to see any of it. He basically used a poultice made from certain plants and mud and wrapped the guy's wrist, and he would manipulate the wrist with his own fingers. And he got that wrist to not only heal quicker, it would have healed more rapidly than if it had been in a cast, but it healed properly. And then the guy went back a few weeks later, got x-rays, and it was amazing to see the manipulation of these broken bones that this healer could do. So my first introduction to, I guess, shamans and what they could do with plants was in the healing arts. On a rare occasion, I could go particularly in the rainforest area, in the equatorial area. That's where you had practices and beliefs that were closer to, I guess, voodoo, because voodoo does come out of West Africa. That's what the African slaves brought to the West Indies. It became known as voodoo in the West Indies. But
Now, I have just a quick question as far as your location, just so I understand this. You were talking about West Africa. Where is this that you were staying in relation to, say, Liberia at the time?
Oh, we were pretty far east. If you look at Africa, the map of Africa, there's this big round portion in the western side. And if you come down to, like, if you want to call it the I don't want to use the word armpit, but if you come down to the crook before you start heading straight south.
Okay, yeah.
Just like the joint in your arm, if you look at an arm that's extended in where your armpit would be, that country, there's a country in there that's quite long. It looks like a wedge, and that's Cameroon.
Okay, I see it now.
Nigeria and Chad and Gabon.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's where I went. And I was anywhere from the southern end of it all the way to the northern end. That's about the length of California. Um, so,
Okay.
so a lot of traditions and belief systems that had that were prevalent there also transported to the West Indies and, of course, then to the Americas with the slave trade. And they became their own unique versions over in the Western Hemisphere. But over there, they still practiced all levels of, I guess, want to say, anything from healing arts to black magic. And there was an insidious side to some of the practices. But a lot of times, most of the time, it was used for good. They strongly believed in the spirit world. There were a variety of spirits that inhabited all shapes and forms of wildlife. There were water spirits. There were totemic animals, and they had some places still used fetish worship where they'd have certain objects that represented certain spirits or deities, and they would have powers.
Are these the same cultures that put spikes through their mouth and things like that, or do they not do things of that nature?
They didn't, not in where I lived. Mostly it was with the Bantu and the semi-Bantu people. Nobody was doing that at the time.
Yeah, I think that was more from India, possibly.
Well, yeah, in Asia, and I've been to Nepal and India, and I've been all over Asia. You'll find a lot of those practices with the, of course, the different the gurus, certain types of gurus that will do sort of, if you want to say self or soft tissue mutilation for the purpose of showing mind over matter. There were groups up in northern Cameroon where they do scarification. They would cut scars into for their children would be scarred deliberately with very intricate cuttings, even in the face, that would identify them with their tribe. I saw one woman with an actual plate in her lip. So,
oh wow!
It was very rare, though, at that time, even at that time.
I see. Did you run into any of the groups, such as the monks, that were known to go up into the mountain area and keep themselves warm simply by harnessing their energy and their chi?
Yes, I went and visited. There were temples in Nepal. We couldn't go to Tibet, but I did see this, and I did see them heat up their bodies to evaporate water off of sheets and mind over matter stuff. So yes, I saw all kinds of interesting phenomena based on their mind over matter abilities. In West Africa, we had Pygmies. There are a variety of tribes. They were also very gifted as far as this sort of almost preternatural ability. I mean, they were just very skilled with working in the rainforest. Even the Bantu and semi-Bantu weren't that skilled in living in harmony with the forest. The Pygmies were very, very skilled, and they had a wonderful level of ethnobotanical knowledge. They knew every plant in that forest and what could hurt you, what could heal you. They were most amazing people. Sadly, I didn't have a lot of time to be with them because half the time I take the arduous trip to go to their village, they were off hunting and their village would be empty. It was interesting to try to track them down. They were very mobile people.
Well, I do have a few specific questions for you. One of them we kind of touched on a little bit, but I saw a video, I want to say a couple of years ago, that was on YouTube, and James saw the same video of a man who was harnessing supposedly his chi and lights this piece of paper, or it might be a napkin or something, into flames, and he literally bursts into flames. Is that for real?
Yes, it is real. I'm not sure if it's the same gentleman, but I met one of those people, or it might have been him. I know camera crews came and filmed the one gentleman I met. He lives in Indonesia. He's Chinese Indonesian, and he has that ability. I've seen it demonstrated, and I've seen lots of examples of channeling your chi demonstrated where they can almost move objects, and definitely you can feel it. I remember touching this particular healer's arm, and it was like touching or holding an electric catfish. And wow. And I know in nature there are animals that generate electromagnetic fields. I mean, you don't go around touching electric eels, it'll kill you, but because I think they
Right.
generate some like 50,000 volts. I mean, they can not, electric eel can stop a horse in its track. It can kill a man. But there are other electric animals on the planet, mostly fish. I haven't seen it in the mammal world, but touching this guy was like touching an electric eel. And I've even met some Reiki, very rare, but I've met a couple of Reiki healers where I can absolutely feel it as their hands get close to the body. You can absolutely feel that energy.
Well,
So,
this particular man, if it is the one that made the video, I know what happened with that man. He was doing another demonstration not long after that with another film crew, in which he took a nail in his hand and slammed it down real hard on the table and pushed it all the way through this like inch-and-a-half thick board. But in doing that, a splinter popped up and hit one of the people that were there and injured them. And he was very, very, very troubled by that. And he said no more demonstration. And he shut the whole thing down, and they couldn't get him to talk about it ever again.
right. And again, I don't know if it is this same individual, but there is a risk with all this power and this manipulation of power. And of course, his job isn't to injure anyone. He was a healer. The one I met
That's
was a
right.
healer.
That's right. That's what he said.
And most of these people do use this ability for healing and not for harm. So, granted, the same use of concentrating the chi is very important in martial arts. And there's a lot of non-contact martial arts type of activities where
Absolutely.
you don't have to touch your opponent. You just knock them flat with your energy. So then the question is, Western minds who are cynical and clinical, and if it's not scientific, then it doesn't exist. Well, they go in with this attitude. Well, they're just acting, or it's make believe, or it's trickery, or Granted, there
Well,
are
you're
charlatans.
right. You're right. Well,
Char-
there is. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, there are charlatans even in those cultures. There's many in the Philippines where they pretend to be pulling damaged tissue and organs from your body, and it's all fakery. But the
Yeah,
question,
you can see that on the movie Man in the Moon with Jim Carrey, where it's the story of Andy Kaufman. Yeah, they showed
exactly,
that.
and I've seen it for real. So,
Oh wow.
and the
Well,
Philippines, yeah.
there was something else I was going to ask you as well, and I hope I hit the right name here, and I hope you know about this tribe. But have you heard about a tribe in the Amazon jungle called the Mayaruni, or the Mayaruna tribe?
Well, I haven't. There are many tribes in the Amazon. I'm familiar with the Yanomami, and there's hundreds of them. So I'm not.
Okay.
But I don't have the particulars on that tribe. No.
Okay. Well, this is what I wanted to ask about. Apparently, in the Amazon rainforest, they have this special frog. It's called the Philomedusa bicolor, also known as the Sapo frog. And what they do is they'll take this frog and they'll tie it up basically and kind of agitate it a little bit with a stick, and it will excrete this toxin off of its back, which they then scrape off of the frog, and they'll let the frog go so they don't harm the frog. And they'll take a stick and get a slight ember on the end of the stick and burn someone, and then they'll rub this sapo frog excretion into the burn, and then that will give them supposedly they're supposed to get for about an hour and a half they're supposed to throw up and get sick, but then they're experiencing a sharpening and a heightening of the senses and the ability to go for days hunting without food or water, supposedly.
Well, no, those whether it's fraud. We also have. You've heard of the cane toad, which I think
Oh
is out.
yes, absolutely.
And there was an issue with licking cane toads and getting high. Native Americans all over, particularly in the Amazon. Amazon is rich, 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 rich in amphibian toxins and, of course, plant toxins. And the natives, again, the local people, understand and have understood for thousands of years how this can work with their minds and getting them into altered states. And if you have that, you have ayahuasca, you have a variety of other kinds of frog secretions, some deadly. I mean, you have arrow frog secretion that they use to hunt with. It just paralyzes you. But the fact that humans find these things out and learn how to turn them into, I guess, substances that can help them get in touch with these alternate realities or these other perceptions, these, I guess you can call them otherworldly perceptions. It's just an amazing thing, but humans have been doing that since humans could. There are theories that we became cognitive and aware creatures because of our, if you believe in evolution, which as an anthropologist I do, so you're looking at 1 million years ago or more, where they were ingesting certain kinds of fungi because of having to eat whatever they had to eat. And that altered the brain to bring us to consciousness, where then the question is, well, if other animals ate that same fungus, why didn't they become self-aware? I mean, as far as we know, we're the only critter on this planet that's very self-aware, and we can launch into abstract thought. We know other creatures don't really do that, and they don't think in terms of past or present or future. Well, they think in present, but so these are wonderful theories that all kinds of anthropologists kick around to say, where did this come from? But there's lots of stuff in the Amazon, there's lots of stuff in Africa, and there's lots of stuff in Asia, and even here in North America. These natural substances exist, and people have learned how to use them to alter perception.
So, Laurie, I think you know where I'm going to go with this. What was your original exposure? How did you originally get exposed to Carlos Castaneda and his Don Juan character and their Little Smoke and Peyote? And what's your both your personal and professional opinion on that as an anthropologist?
Well, I started, Castaneda became popular in the 70s, I believe. I think I read him back then. And I think it was one of the works that kind of pushed me toward going into anthropology. I'm also a writer, and I'm a writer and I'm an artist. I've been a graphic artist. I was a champion sand sculptor in my day. Don't ever try that. That's backbreaking work.
That's pretty cool.
And I've been gifted with a lot of wild and crazy dreams, and I have my own particular brain chemistry. And people always ask me, like, oh, what kind of drugs are you on? And I've never done anything. I don't do that stuff. I quoted Salvador Dali, the famous surrealist painter, when he was asked, what drugs do you take? He says, drugs? I don't need drugs. I am the drug. See, I always quote him. But I have a lot of strange dreams, and the dreams have always been the source of my creativity. I haven't really needed to use anything alternative to get my wild imaginings going. So I always loved reading, of course, and Castaneda was a popular writer, and it wasn't until later till I realized he was an anthropologist. It was when I was doing my graduate work, and we go to these anthropology conventions, if you want, and they'd be poo-pooing him and putting him down, and he sold his soul to popular genre. The academics were really snide about him.
Right.
But they also forget Margaret Mead became a popular anthropology writer. I mean, it wasn't all about academia. So, yes, I really appreciate how Castaneda was, of course, he went out, he dipped his toe into those waters. In fact, he went full board swimming in those waters, which is very easy for male anthropologists to do. It is not so easy for female anthropologists. We have a lot more on the line with our maintaining our professionalism, let's say. And a lot of those rituals are restricted too. I mean, women are not included. So you have to understand that the males in those societies take over the rituals and the usage of the botanicals. Okay. Females are often prohibited from doing it.
That's very interesting, especially when you consider that females traditionally have the role as the healer in a lot of cultures, especially when it comes to plants and herbalism in general. It's interesting that that's the psychedelic experiences are primarily restricted to males.
Well, in those kinds of social structures, they're pretty well. Not saying women don't have an important role, they do, but the males tend to dominate, and I guess if they see the good thing, they're going to make sure they hold on to the good thing, and they're going to restrict it. They restrict it from children. There's an age restriction, there's a gender restriction. And you're right, there are women in those cultures who work as shamans and healers. But usually the case is, as we've studied, even in Asia, where it was primarily males who had control over all that until Buddhism happened. And then more and more males were joining the monasteries to have that elite life, to strive for being lamas, like the Dalai Lama, right?
Right.
As they left their role in the village as a spiritual or shamanic practitioner, it opened the door for women to step in. It's very much a socioeconomic thing with shamanism, that people who are they're being marginalized, they're marginalized in some way from the general society. They may have things like epilepsy or sometimes schizophrenia. We would diagnose it as that. Their behavior doesn't fit the mainstream, or they are just born on the poor end of the other side of the tracks. By becoming shamans, this enables them to gain some socioeconomic advantage in the community. And for a long time, men held that role until they moved into another venue, let's say, and then women started stepping in. So different cultures have different views about it, but wherever you see control of knowledge, and knowing ethnobotanicals is a knowledge thing, and it gives you an advantage, women would be rubbed out because these men would want to have control of that knowledge.
Right.
So it's been a conflict in many cultures for eons.
Well, in our culture, the men are the federal government, and we are all the women in that example.
Yes, and you have to look at, the whole idea of Schedule 1, even
that's
in Maine,
very true. Very true.
Maine now, medicinal marijuana is finally allowed, and in the town of Portland, they just voted in the right to carry 21 grams of pot on your person.
Well, what I'm more concerned about is something like Ibogaine, something that can help all these addicts that they want to treat but not cure in our country. These people could be absolutely cured in a safe medical environment using Ibogaine, which is something that's been used for thousands of years in many cultures, but yet it's disallowed in this country because they don't want to cure anyone. They want to treat them constantly. At least that's my belief. I don't know. What do you think on that?
Oh my gosh! Well, we understand this is it's a social political thing. There's been, of course, a lot of debate. The issue with the drug culture, if you want to use that word, in this country, is that it's criminalized and it's not looked at as a medical issue. And why? Because the bottom line is money. So it's probably more cost effective, ridiculously enough, to slam them into prison and keep them at, again, a low socioeconomic level. Then they're not going to be competition to the powers that be. There's just so many ways you can look at this socially and politically, and many sociologists take it on and say it's a way of keeping certain people of certain persuasions out of the mainstream. A lot of states, if you're in prison for being caught using or possessing, you don't have the right to vote anymore. You can't vote. Now, in Maine, they are still allowed to vote, but
meanwhile,
think of how that influences everything socially and politically.
What a lot of people don't realize is that the federal government still has an active program that supplies cannabis cigarettes to, I think it's 3 people that are still left alive through a program they did. And a lot of people don't realize that. But, they want to sweep that under the rug. And, like you said, it is a money thing, especially when it comes to something like Ibogaine that would help people.
Mm-hmm.
You hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's exactly how I feel about it. What have you seen in other cultures? Do you see a lot of, well, of course, I know it's been a while, but were there a lot of Westerners that were coming over there specifically to have access to these types of things?
Nepal, yes. Not in West Africa. And It was funny I was in Korea and Japan a lot. They have we had a bit of a scandal with some teachers who were, not saying they don't have access to certain products over there. And some Americans found access and would use them, but it was a huge scandal. In fact, just recently, one of a top Korean a pop singer, if you want to put it, young man who's been pretty famous, and he got caught in a scandal of using, and he wound up committing suicide because the shame was so big. Over there, shame is a major factor. I knew that in the Korean army, they would use cannabis they'd infuse it in the skin. Like you were talking about the frog, or, secretions, burning it into the skin or rubbing it in. That's how the Korean military would use cannabis. They didn't smoke it. They would burn it into the sore joints or muscles.
Yeah, a lot of people will make tinctures out of it and rub it in their skin. You're right. Yeah.
And even though it's highly illegal to use over there, the military was using it. I mean, I knew a lot of guys in the Korean army, and they would show me the burn marks in their skin and explain how they did it and what they did. And they said it was quite effective because it helped reduce pain and strain. You didn't find people smoking it, but if you went, of course, if I lived in Turkey, you had hashish bars all over the place, again, restricted to women, but a lot of American males and European males would go in the hookah bars, no problems. Just don't be carrying that stuff with you and around and out of the country. But if you're in the hookah bar, there was no issue. I've been even Morocco and all that. And of course, in places like Malaysia and Thailand, lots of substances, there's lots of opiates, among other things, but very strict rules. And you had to be very, very careful if you were going to engage in any of it, because if you got caught with it, it was a death sentence. It says it all over on your airplane ticket everywhere. If they catch you, particularly trying to transport, it's a death sentence. I don't know if they were that strict on people using. If you were using it in the designated areas, you were fine. So, and of course people would go there to try and gain enlightenment. These substances help people perceive reality in a different way. I mean, so
I guess you've probably heard of the theory of the monkeys coming down and eating the mushrooms, and that's how we evolved. I don't know that I buy that, but that may show the importance of things.
That's what I was saying earlier on. There is a theory that our ancestors, our Paleolithic ancestors, had somehow started consuming certain kinds of fungi. But then my attitude is, well, we would have been cohabiting in a sense in the same environment with other primates and other critters who would have eaten the same foodstuffs, but they didn't develop the level of awareness that humans did. So what made
you're right. Yeah.
What made the human species, and there are many kinds that live simultaneously on the planet. Keep in mind, Neanderthal, Java man, they were simultaneously living with what became us, the Homo sapiens, but with Cro-Magnon. There were different kinds of hominins on the planet. Not all of them developed the level of brain power that our species did. So that's a good question. What is it? What about our brains that took off? I don't know. Some people say it was cooked meat, but Neanderthals ate cooked meat, and they pretty much stayed the same on the same level for 250,000 years. And Australopithecus robustus was about the same level for 1,000,000 years. We've been around as a species maybe 100,000 years as a cognitive, inventive, smart critter on the planet. And we haven't had such a long run yet.
Well, this is a tad off topic, but I do want to ask you this because you've been exposed to it. In these other cultures, did you ever hear of a creature called a Gigantopithecus or something like that? It's
right,
kind of...
It was an ape.
Yes.
It existed. I believe it was in Asia and Russia. I mean, but it was something that was found in Asia. It was larger than any gorilla today. It was huge.
Very cool.
And some of the Bigfoot theories think it may be a Gigantopithecus.
Yeah, that's where I was kind of going with that. I was curious if you'd ever seen anything firsthand and if you had an opinion on that.
Well, I've never encountered anything like, and it's odd, in all my strange travels, I've never run into, even in the Himalayas, I never ran into a Yeti. I've trekked through a lot of woods, even in this country. I've never encountered anything like a Bigfoot. I mean, we even had versions of that down in Maryland, Maryland of all places, right outside of Washington, D.C., they had the Goat Man and the Bunny Man. And
I think every culture has something like that.
it's true. And it is, I don't even know what to tell you here, but, it's fascinating stuff. And, in Africa, oh gosh, I never remember how to pronounce it. The Mokele Mbembe, which is they believe it's a plesiosaur. It's another dinosaur running around in the Congo, and there have been cryptozoologists looking for that, much like they look for Loch Ness or Champy or anything. I mean, I love cryptozoology. It's fascinating.
Absolutely, it is. What about any experience with, Keith mentioned Ibogaine, what about ayahuasca or kratom or mushrooms or DMT or anything along those lines? I know you don't partake of that stuff, but have you ever been around somebody who has?
Sure, I suppose it's just like in the day when lots of my friends were doing acid, dropping acid. And I think here's the deal. When I'm looking at traditional societies that use natural hallucinogens, and it's controlled with it's being used by certain members like shamans who've been trained in its usage and the perceptions it could produce. That's a very different experience from recreational users that I find in this country.
Yeah, there's a very distinct difference. Absolutely.
Yeah. I find with a trained shaman who's been through, from the moment that person has been decreed as a shaman or is on the track for becoming a shaman, they're going through a tutelage that lasts for years and years, and there's a strict discipline about it. They don't just casually go off, oh man, I'm going to get high now. No, it's very ritualistic. It has a definite purpose. It's how they do commune to the ancestors and the gods, and that's how they commune with nature, and nature talks to them so they know where are the best hunting grounds. It was all about finding some plug into the forces beyond our ken for human survival. That's where shamanism started. But then, I guess now in our modern world, this stuff goes way back, even to 18th century, 19th century. But Western society would get a hold of this stuff and turn it into recreation. And I think sadly now where you have some groups going down to South America just for that experience. And granted, they may say I'm doing this for my own personal development and enlightenment. I think a lot of them are just going down because they can afford to, and it becomes like a tourist thing, and it's sad to me.
Well, yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with Americans and how they've treated recreational drugs, and it's given kind of a bad belief system to any kind of thing you want to label a drug. A drug is not necessarily a negative thing in and of itself. Like you're saying, if you go over, for example, to do an ayahuasca ceremony in Peru, they have very traditional music that they hum. The entire tribe is involved, and they're blowing tobacco smoke in your face, and you're doing it all ritualized, very controlled.
Absolutely. And that was for a reason, because if everybody and their dog was out there imbibing in this stuff, it would cause social chaos. So that's where certain members of the culture said, we're in control of it, we're in charge, we can do it, it's restricted. And this is where taboos come into place, because taboos are a way of keeping social integrity. And yes, it's a way to creating, sense of privilege in a culture too, where certain members would have the privilege of access and others wouldn't have it. But if you wanted it and if you qualified, you'd have to go through training and years and years of this. Even in Asia, in some of the Buddhist monastic environments, it's tremendous discipline and training.
You know what I find fascinating about all the other cultures is what you're talking about here, what you have to go through to become a shaman. But yet in other cultures, and in maybe even some of the same cultures, I don't know, what they have to do to become considered men. In certain cultures, they have to stick their hand down in this glove that's filled with these giant ants for a certain amount of time. And did you see anything like that while you were there?
No, I didn't see any. What I saw was in North Cameroon, and it was a male initiation ritual. It went on for several months in the summer months. Young boys from the age of 14, I think, to 17 were going off to be circumcised. And of course, that's a painful surgery at that age. And of course, and they had to worry about infections. There was also certain kinds of cutting and scarification they'd get on their skin. And they'd have to run around dressed in the leaves of this one particular kind of tree. And they had to stand out with a calabash, which is half of a gourd. It's like a bowl. And they'd have to beg for money. These are young African young men. And then they also had to go out and whip all the unmarried women in the village. And
it's interesting how they come up with these things.
That became something interesting. And I was in the middle. I was watching all this stuff. I was excluded from seeing some of the juju rituals, which is their sacred mask dancing, because women weren't supposed to see it. But I have to confess, I had a telescope. So I just go set myself up and spy on their camp. And I wasn't allowed to take pictures either. So I was an artist. So I sketched a lot of the things I saw. But these young men were put through their paces. They were isolated from the general group. They weren't allowed to really communicate they were taken from their mothers, It was kind of like a deer camp or something, they do up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. The young boys go out with the men to learn how to be men, and so I saw things like that, and I've seen other things in South Asia but those were, not necessarily initiation rituals, but more of the mystics in Asia would do a lot of, like I said, soft tissue mutilation. I watched a guru carry a 40-pound rock on his penis. This was something else, They put themselves through a lot of pain because, of course, pain kicks up endorphins. And
I've heard of that. I've heard of them doing that. I've never actually known which tribe did it, but I've heard of that. It's crazy to us.
All kinds of people do it all around the world. And if you want to look at guys who play football in this culture, I always ask my nephew, why'd you bust out 2 knees for a stupid game? To my mind, it's like, wow, the pain. But there's a high people can get from all that pain. And a lot of cultures still practice those kinds of activities. No pain, no gain. And they would bring them to an altered state as well. So right. I have seen that done. Yeah.
I kind of wanted to give a little bit of a plug out to a site. It's called Vice.com, and they post a lot of videos that show a lot of the cultures you're talking about here. And there's one in particular done by a man named Hamilton Morris that you can watch, where he's going and it's called Doing the Frog, where he goes to one of these tribes and he experiences taking the frog. So it's very interesting. And there's a lot of other videos that show just different cultural things all over the world.
Well, and that's good. And it's nice that I'm so happy for the internet. My day, we didn't have anything. It took 2 months to get a letter back and forth, where I lived in Cameroon. I mean, it took forever to get mail. We didn't have anything, no internet. I didn't even have a telephone. So it's so cool now that you can see these groups of people that no one has ever heard about. And now they either have their own YouTube channel. The Yanomami have their own YouTube videos, and or you do have anthropologists or other kinds of explorers down there filming it and recording it for posterity. But again, you got to be careful with that because, I'm not saying someone can't go down and do a selfie thing and like a travel log and document their cool experience, but how trained are they and how aware are they of the purpose of those rituals?
Well, and here's something else I'm kind of worried about. You can go on the internet now and order an ayahuasca kit or an Ibogaine kit, and that could be very dangerous.
Yes, if you don't know how to use that stuff, it's going to mess with you. These are toxins, okay? They make you sick, and if you don't know your own health condition, it can kill you.
Or if you don't use the right amount, it's very, very precise and specific things these shamans are taught.
Absolutely. And it does, I've never done it myself, but I've seen people and they get sick. I've seen the shamans get sick, There's a theory about that when the body is being put through its paces on that level, and if you generate nausea and vomiting and sometimes a high fever, that's what brings you closer to the other world,
And they also believe you're eliminating toxins from your system as well.
And you really are.
That's right. Absolutely.
I remember we had problem in West Africa. Believe me, it was like living in a giant petri dish. So I've survived malaria, filaria, typhoid. I've had all those things, and even hepatitis. And we're just talking regular, Hep A, which you got. I mean, it was.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The point is, the Western medicine would say, for hepatitis, it's going to take 6 to 8 weeks, and and you got your wonderful, whatever those shots were, gamma globulin, I think. And there were a lot of controversies, but I do remember a local concoction that was made from guava leaves and a bunch of other stuff I didn't really know. Went to a local healer. That stuff made you puke your gut. It came out of both ends for weeks. It was awful. But your liver healed very quickly. So within a month, you were back on track. It was just amazing. But most Westerners wouldn't touch it. Oh, it could kill you. And I'm like, okay, you can.
If they would look up how many people aspirin kills a year, they would be very surprised.
Well, it's that whole ethnocentric concept of what is actual medicine. So this is
right.
Was a huge, and even in Asia, I love living in Asia because I had the best of both worlds. You had the allopathic medicine if you wanted it, and you had so many Chinese herbs and potions. Oh my gosh, for everything. I love the apothecaries over in China and Korea. Some fantastic herbal treatments. So you had acupuncture and you had acupressure and you had traditional chiropractics, which are a little different from here. I took advantage of all of it, and it was quite beneficial. Over here, it's cost prohibitive. And even if you get it over here, it's certainly not the same as there. So I really miss having access to all those good things in those parts of the planet. I had better health care in Africa than I have in this country, believe it or not. And of course in Korea too.
So to switch gears a little bit, we're already up on an hour, and I really didn't want to do much more than an hour.
Okay, wow, that went fast.
Yeah, it went really fast. Well, great conversation happened, so I didn't want to interrupt anything. I did want to take some time though and talk about your upcoming documentary project and your experience in the paranormal and that sort of stuff, just to try to get the info out there. So,
Sure.
What's the concept behind the documentary you're trying to put together versus what's already just bombarding central media with the paranormal phenomenon that's going on? What are you trying to do that's different?
Well, first of all, I have to say I do work in media production, mostly as a writer, sometimes a director. I did produce about 5-6 years ago 2 shows about, one was a ghost hunting show for out of New England, and the other was just on strange, if you want to say, whether it was paranormal or not, but some strange phenomena. So we'd go around and document or interview people the way we could. But what I'm seeing with this plethora of ghost shows, I mean, have you seen the new one, Killer Contact or something? And then some of the issues, like the article I sent you of the ghost hunters doing damage to historical properties and some issues going on. I'm sitting here as an anthropologist. What is this? This is a huge socio-cultural phenomena. And so who are the members of the paranormal community? Just like an anthropologist would, I'd go into the paranormal community and find out who the practitioners are, what are their methods. In the magazine, in our October issue of the magazine, and I know you, your lovely group was part of that, James. I asked 3 questions. What is your methodology for ghost hunting? What are the challenges of being a paranormal investigator, and why is doing paranormal investigation important? So I still want to work from those 3 questions, but I want to go deeper and explore the lives of the people who are doing this and who are embracing this and out there daily with their different approaches and their different attitudes, if you want to say, or perceptions and belief systems, to describe what is the paranormal community, how is it defined, if it's even possible to do that. So right now we're working on the business end of it, trying to put together a budget. We will be running some crowdsource funding campaigns. I know we're trying to get some events off the ground to raise the money, because you have to pay your crew, James, Media
Are you familiar with the documentary The Union?
Nope, not familiar with it.
Well, they made a sequel to that, or they're making a sequel to that, called The Union Part 2, and they did something, I think, close to what you're talking about. They had a website describing their project, saying how much money they needed to raise, and then there was a donation button if you wanted to donate. But how they did it was a little different. They said, pre-order your copy of the documentary, and this money will go towards making the documentary. If we don't reach X amount of money, of course, we'll refund the money. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
Oh, no, I know how all that works. That's part of, we have to set up, of course, with all crowdfunding. I've done this before. You set up some kind of, reward system. So you will get a copy of the DVD anyway, or you'll get a copy of the documentary. There are copies of the magazine with that 7-page spread on the topics from about 16 different paranormal groups. We have other incentives that we're working on. We're still just having our meetings to see how we're going to organize this, because this is vast. This means, I got to make trips down to Houston to see y'all, we got to find a way to get out to, British Columbia. There are so many people around the country, and I'm not even talking about Europe and anywhere else in the world. I mean, I'd like to see this go as far and wide as it can, even on a global level. I don't know how that would happen, but if the first documentary comes off and is successful, that will lead us down the road to expanding on it. It's just such a huge phenomenon right now. And, I remember back in the day, we're talking 30, 40 years ago, because we didn't have the internet and media, even a home movies were not cheap to do. I mean, you had to use Super 8 film, and you didn't have a lot of stuff on paranormal phenomenon. There just wasn't a lot of documentation about it. And we didn't talk about it, because in my day, and I've seen things that, believe me, defy the laws of physics 6 ways to Sunday. And I've had witnesses to most of those things. And all you can do is say, what in the heck has brought this about? Why is that 10-pound frying pan flying across the room by itself? So you have to ask the question. But in those days, you didn't dare talk about it. My dad was a pilot. He saw all kinds of, if you want to call them UFOs. I saw one with him. We could not explain it. It did not fit the pattern of normal aircraft. But if he went around talking about it, he would lose his job. You know what I mean?
I think we should have another podcast about that topic alone, because I have a lot of things to add to that as well.
Sure. I'm just saying, now I'm very happy now people can talk about their experiences when
that's true.
You couldn't. I had to never talk about the stuff I encountered. People just would write me, get out of here. In academia, are you kidding me? Even as an anthropologist? No. You always have to find some psychological, cultural, or some way to explain it off.
Well, that's right. They had a long time ago, someone, a medical doctor, wrote The No Medicine Approach to Medicine and thought he would win the Nobel Prize. And he was just torn apart by his peers.
Absolutely. Science is one of the most jealous deities I've encountered. So, even in my field, and whether it's physics, whether you want to discuss the holographic universe ideas, you've got to be careful because they don't tolerate heretics at all. And you'll get in trouble. Castaneda got all kinds of flack and was pretty much almost disowned by the American Anthropological Association in his day. Now they're embracing him more, but I've seen anthropologists get a lot of heat from trying to extend their, here's what I think and here's what I've seen. I really don't know how to explain it, but this is what happens. And then if you don't explain it in a rational, logical way, then you're not going to even get published in academia anyway.
Well, science is really the only reason that this stuff is on TV to begin with. The only reason it got traction in the first place was folks like TAPS would go in and I love their work.
Yeah.
They would go in and apply scientific method and try to figure out what's going on, and that lent legitimacy to this study. That's the only reason we're even having this conversation, is because folks like that, they cut the path.
But James, guess what it took? Now here we're in the day when you're back in the 19th century, when you had a lot of spiritual mediums, they were mostly female. And they were kind of, granted, there were a lot of charlatans there too. Houdini did his job to bust them all. But there were some who were, I deemed, pretty legitimate. But here now, with the advent of the engineers' tools like the K2 meter, I mean, these are electrical engineering tools, EMF meters, they learned they were picking up other things. But who took over the industry, if you want to say, or took over the cultural practice, were the men. The men came in and dominated this field, where before it had been more about the females being the sensitives and the mediums and having the perceptions. It's quite interesting.
And it all goes back to the belief systems they were raised to believe, or whatever their religion suggested.
Absolutely. And even if it flew in the face of that mainstream religion, they branched out on their own and at great risk as well. But It is interesting how science had to come in and validate it in the least. And this is part of what I'd like to look at in the documentary, with the history of this. And
have you even begun to search for a name yet for this documentary? Has it been coined yet?
I am going to work with Paranormal World. I've got to see if that hasn't been used yet. I haven't gone out and done any. I'm finishing I teach at a college here, so it's end of semester and I'm drowning and stuff. But I'm going to work with Paranormal World for now. If we find out someone else has that name, then we'll find something else. I don't know yet.
Where can people go now if they want to help you out or at least follow your work?
Well, they can just right now. I still have a copy of the magazine. Excuse me, I'm going to cough here. I have a copy of the magazine on a website, IdeaGems.com. I am also linking, for example, these podcasts to two other websites. One is ectomist.com, ECTOMIST.com, and the other is Zogby Entertainment.com, ZOGBY Entertainment. That's the media company that I'm working with. We haven't got anything set up yet for funding or contributions, but if people, there are various email addresses on all those websites that they can email me. Probably the best one is IdeaGems, IDEAGEMS @AOL.com. Or you can go to Zogby Entertainment @gmail.com. But I am going to be putting the word out there for different paranormal investigators, particularly, to get in touch with me. I'm trying to find a cost-effective way of gathering video. I remember I asked James to make a little webcam testimonial, if you want to say, about the Houston ghost researchers, methods, just those 3 basic questions again. So if I can get a bunch of little webcam testimonials, I will edit them into a presentation to go on the crowdfunding to show why this is such a valid community, and they shouldn't be dismissed. So that's sort of my goal here.
Cool. Yeah, that's a noble goal. I'm really looking forward to shedding some light on the legitimate folks in this field.
Right.
So I think we're probably going to cut it here. I know Keith has got to cut out here in a minute, but it's been a really interesting conversation. So the plan
Great
is
conversation. Loved it.
Me too.
The plan is to hopefully follow this up with a couple of episodes, talking with a couple of shaman about their experiences, and we've got a friend of Stephen Davis who's going to come on in a subsequent episode, and his primary goal is to talk newcomers through a shamanistic experience with mushrooms.
Well, I enjoyed it, Laurie.
Hey, I always enjoy talking to you guys.